Just let me know if something's weird with the audio. I know I don't have headphones on or anything, so I know
Well,
sometimes.
so far, so good. It usually works pretty well. We don't usually have trouble with it. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? So we've never met or spoken before, to my knowledge. So
Yeah, no, we haven't. I first want to thank you because what you're doing is awesome, and especially like your church side of things. Like your sermons are really good, and you haven't just helped out me. You helped out my dad too. He's was kind of going through a tough spot, and your sermons seem to like help re-energize and kind of reinvigorate him. So
good.
for that. But I'm a public school teacher and an artist, and I actually found out about you through Jonathan Pageau, and I think one of the first ones I listened to was your were robots, human skin robots. That was, I think, the first one. I made my dad listen to it, and he was like, "Oh, you gotta listen to this guy." Yeah. So, and I've just been listening to your stuff, and it's really good. So, thanks for that. But I teach. I've been a Christian pretty much all my life. Like I remember saying the Lord's Prayer at like 5, and just kind of staying steady with the faith. And but after starting to listen, somehow I got caught in this bubble. And I didn't really. I live in Louisiana, so it's like the most Catholic, like of Catholics, and somehow I missed all of that. I have no idea how. And then one of my ex-girlfriends, she was Catholic, so I got really exposed to that and their traditions. But I kind of started realizing, listening to you and Jonathan Pageau and then all these different people, I was like, oh, I'm what everybody else probably calls evangelical. Like that's what I grew up with.
Sure.
But it's different. And you've kind of talked about a little bit how it's not under the umbrella of a big tradition. It's like all these kind of like isolated churches started off by a pastor who wants to do good work. And so listening to you and Jonathan Pageau, y'all are really like opening up this all these church traditions that I can grow up with. And so it's been extremely helpful. And I think every denomination that I've kind of been exposed to has something really important to offer. And then where I grew up, they gave a really big emphasis on the Bible and Scripture, and so and how paramount that is to our understanding. But leaves out stuff like because a lot of the Pete Church was like a lashback to Catholicism. Like it was too much tradition, and I don't think people completely understood what they were doing and why they were doing it, and it never been taught to them, or they didn't care, or didn't care a little deeper, and so just kind of threw it all away. And I'm like, now I'm kind of rediscovering all this. I'm like, what? Like, where'd all this come from? So that's kind of like a little bit of what I want to talk to you about, because you talk about St. Augustine, and Jonathan Pageau talks a lot about this early church fathers. So when I hear you in your talks with other people, you talk about all that, so that's super helpful for me. So I'm like, oh, okay, it kind of points me in certain directions. But who do you, like, as someone who doesn't know much about church tradition and wants to learn more, like, what direction would you point me in? I guess that's my question.
Well, let me grab a book. A lot depends on what your main mode of learning is. Where's that book? I got 2 copies. See, if you came into my office, I'd just give you one. Where is that book? I've got 2 copies. It's a big, huge, fat book. Why can't I see it? It's like church history in plain language or something like that. Should be in my church history section. I just redid my office and I can't find it. Now I'm discouraged, because I was all proud of myself for cleaning my office. But yeah, I'm all tangled up in cords now. There we go. Well, YouTube isn't a bad place to start, actually, because I found that when I Google something on YouTube, search for something on YouTube, there are a fair number of decent videos out there that might give you a 4-minute version, a 10-minute version, or an hour version of someone. Reeves he teaches church history at Gordon Conwell in Massachusetts. He's got a very good channel on church history. So there's a resource. But maybe I've got it over here. The book is entitled something like Church History in Plain English. And that's an anthology like that of church history that would kind of give you an overview. And then from there, my advice would be find something that grabs your interest and then just follow it down a little. And to the degree that, our brains are quite interesting in that we're mysteries to ourselves. And more often than not, when something grabs your interest, there are other parts of your brain that have a reason for that. And so it's not a bad idea to follow it down. So a lot of, I went to Christian school growing up, so you get that level of church history. And then I majored in American history in college, so not a lot of church history in there. But then when I went to seminary, we had more church history. And so I've always been interested in history. So then I'll read books that grab my interest. I'll listen to audiobooks. I like the Great Courses series that you can get on Audible. Those have nice little half-hour chunks. But even all of those things are overviews. And so just find things that grab your interest. And, another piece of advice we actually got from my church history prof in seminary. I left seminary in 1990, so that's a few years ago. Yeah. But one of the things that he told us in terms of our ongoing education was, pick one of 4 theologians. And he offered Augustine, it's a Reformed seminary, so Augustine, Calvin, Luther, or C.S. Lewis, and spend a little time focusing in on one of them. And C.S. Lewis is fairly easy to do because his books are fairly small and he's the most contemporary of them. But just spend a season reading a whole bunch of C.S. Lewis. From there, you'll probably begin to pick up different ideas of, oh, that sounds interesting. I'll do that next. And I think the key thing actually is to find a learning method that works with the rest of your life. Some people will say, oh, Pastor, you know so much stuff. Well, I'm getting older and I've always been a lifelong learner. So I read books, I listen to audiobooks, and especially now with audiobooks and YouTube, you can, I had 5 kids, so I had to do a lot of driving kids to school, a lot of work in the kitchen, work on the yard. And I just always made sure I had something queued up in my phone so that if I'm doing something mindless, that would get me frustrated. If I had a good book to listen to while I did something mindless, it would, I could get my jobs done and I could learn some things. Not everyone can do that. So when, for example, I'm going on a trip with my wife, often if I'm driving, I can listen to an audiobook, no problem, but I'm an auditory learner. And my wife, if I put an audiobook on while she's driving, her brain isn't wired that way. So
my wife's the same way. Yeah. She can't, it's tough. Like I'll be listening to a podcast or something, and like when she walks in the room, I kind of have to turn it off because it's too distracting for her. And then I have a 2-year-old, so reading books is the window to read books is not the easiest situation to sort out. So I do a little bit of reading at night, but it's super infrequent. And then with all the extra stuff I have to do with teaching, sometimes it's just not.
So what grade do you teach? What level do you teach?
Well, I taught, this is my 8th year teaching. I taught 5th grade for 7 years. And then this year, I was teaching reading and writing, a little bit of social studies at the end. And then now I'm teaching art, which is what I really wanted to do.
Wow.
Pre-K to 5th. So it's a whole new thing, and it's a wide gamut of different types of children.
But that's wonderful. I mean, I don't know. I love kids. It's just wonderful. And I'm glad that your school offers art for children, because that kind of thing.
We're lucky. I'm in a really low income area. And so there's only 2 elementary art teachers in our district. So I'm one of 2 of them. And that it's not offered at every level in elementary, but we have it in all the middle schools and the high schools here in Lafayette. They're really big on the arts or try to emphasize it. So that's a good thing for sure.
So growing up in an evangelical church, did you ever hear, I mean, I know, generally speaking, you'll hear about was it a big church or a small church? Because that makes a big difference too.
It was a small church. We got up to, I think, 2 services at one point. How old was I? It was in high school. So it was probably like early 2000s, late 90s. And then it just kind of started dropping off later once I went to college. I think a lot of people of my generation whose parents had grown up in the church and really helped build it up and had all that momentum and did all the good work in the community. And as their kids got older, my generation, we kind of went off to college and stuff. And then there wasn't much of a renewal of the youth coming back up. So they've been staying pretty small. They're still around, which is good. The pastor I grew up with, he passed away. So that's kind of been, they're in a little bit of a transition right now. Okay. And so it's kind of difficult. Not exactly, I go to Methodist church now, my wife and I. And so I've noticed that Catholicism and the Methodist church, and I'm sure you guys kind of have plans in place that help the chain succession in a church. It's better. It's way better. It's one of the things that I've been most impressed with the other churches with long-standing traditions, because a lot of all the work and all that effort and the community just kind of just dissolves, and it's just kind of sad because a lot of good things happen, and it's one of that's the kind of poverty of that denomination. I feel like it's good emphasis on the word and the power it holds, and kind of putting the Bible up in the hierarchy of what you should be staying true to as much as you can. But with the fragmentation of it, it's pretty tough. Not all of them are like that, but it's just a huge variety. And it's like you said about the frames, like you just don't know. I mean, I had like a couple of moments growing up. I was really naive. I was a good kid. I didn't really do much bad, but then it was kind of just like a rote thing. Like I just grown up that way. My parents were really good about, raising us up and all that kind of stuff. And so I had this moment when I was in youth group where I was like, oh, I saw how the people who were in leadership they were just teenagers. I mean, and doing, had different lives. They didn't have a 2-parent household. Parents I had, some divorce and stuff, and so they were acting like teenagers act, doing stuff, and for me it was real shocking. I was like, whoa, like these people are drinking and they're having premarital sex, and it was like, this was shocking to me, and I had to kind of reevaluate, I shouldn't keep people to hold me to my standards. And then like as I got older, I kind of realized like, well, I was in a pretty self-righteous place there. Not really knowing. It's like this naive self-righteousness. So I hadn't really been tempted with all this stuff, and I was kind of like virtuous by circumstance, I thought a lot about that because of Jordan Peterson. It's like he talks about the shadow, and he did his whole thing with like, he thought through like, oh, I could have been a Nazi, and like I'd never done that till I listened to him, and I was like, well, God, what would I be like if I was just like completely unhinged and I let myself go? Show me what I could be, because I feel like I'm not being responsible if I just go along thinking like, oh, I'm a good person. It's like, he's right. Jordan Peterson's right about you being capable. And I had a dream like that night, and I was like, oh, I was just fine. I don't even want to talk about it. It was so bad. I was just, it scared me. It really scared me. And I was like, a pastor used to say, don't ask them. Don't ask them for don't ask them for something, because you'll get it. You might not want it. And,
be careful what you ask for.
Yeah. But that made me think about, you had the video, I think, posted today, and you were talking about fake it till you make it. And that really kind of like, I was like, oh, it jogged like that experience for me, because I feel like I hear and it's kind of like with Nietzsche, Jordan Peterson, Nietzsche said it, I think, but it was like, you're not, are you really virtuous if you're just, and I'm like Sam Harrison, and it's like, you're going to heaven, so you're going to do this stuff because of the reward at the end, but you're not really doing it for the right reasons. And I'm a teacher, so I'm like, oh, I deal with all these kids, and 90% of them don't do the right thing for the right reasons. They do it because they're going to get or extra recess or candy, or something. And a lot of Christians are that way too. And so I've done a lot of self-reflecting in that area about that. But it's not all bad. Like it's a justifiable argument, but it's not all bad because, like, well, what's the reverse? Like you're just doing whatever you wanted to because you didn't, and
or you dismiss any good thing because it's called sometimes the hermeneutics of suspicion. You dismiss any good thing because you just have bad motives for it. Oh, okay, so let's dismiss every good thing. Well, where does that leave you? So no, you're exactly right.
Yeah, and that's really difficult. I've been thinking about that too. It's like, I'm virtuous of circumstance kind of situation, and then when I face like real temptation, like if I'm placed in a situation of real temptation, like, well, how will I act? Well, I hope I act this way. Don't know if I will. But it's such a slippery thing, and I don't know. I feel like the more and more that kind of, if you delve too deep into it, it's like almost it's too much. Like you can't. It's hard to like. I feel like you're just gonna get trapped in a loop, and then you dissolve, and you can't really navigate anything. And I don't know, like every time I go to church on Sundays, it's kind of like helpful because I feel like, it's like if you kind of get in this questioning your motives too deeply, you lose your center, and then you kind of get oriented back. At least for me, whenever I go to church, it's helpful in that sense. And I don't know how people like Sam Harrison do it. Like, I have a lot of respect for him because it's just like he says like he wants to ground in something solid. But I'm like, man, at least I have the Bible. I don't know. He had a guy who on a while back, and he said he couldn't look at himself in the mirror, and I just like, man, almost brought me to tears. It's just like it's such a hard place to be, and I know that's a struggle for a lot of people. And I don't know. I'm grateful I grew up in the church the way I did, because I don't know if I wasn't in that circumstance, like what I would be at, or where I'd probably be where a lot of those guys are at.
It's a good culture. I've been working on this in my mind a lot lately. A good culture enables the children to do what's wiser than their years can afford. And the same with being raised in a good family and by good parents. They set, it doesn't mean you'll stay on that road, but they set you on a good road. And as from what we know about human development, you can pick up stumbling, habits that will trip you up and bind you. And this is the tragedy of victims of childhood abuse, is that sometimes, things happen to them that builds things into them that inhibit their capacity to trust, to avoid certain temptations. I mean, we all are tempted by some things, but
Sure.
it's if you've been blessed by a good culture or a good home, it does enable you to do well. And self-righteousness then again is a terrible trap, because you were given these wonderful gifts might look down on another and say, I'm not tempted by these things. Oh, but you didn't earn any of that. That was just given to you by your culture and by your church and by your parents.
Exactly. And that's something I've had to really work on, because it gets bad. I mean, it's everything that that people who leave the church hate, and it's like totally justifiable. I mean, like it's just and so I've worked really, like, I thought a lot about it, and I kind of had to that was one of the big stepping stones of just like my continual journey, and I try to be on guard about it because it's I was just fortunate. Like my dad, he grew up in Flint, Michigan during the race riots and stuff, and I mean his home life wasn't the greatest, and so he kind of flipped. He did the other thing. He's like, I'm not doing that, and
Yep.
I benefited from it, and so I didn't have to have the same struggles he did. But it's I see with my students. I see a lot of students. They have it. They have the chip on their shoulder. Even really young too. I mean, it's like I never taught kindergarten and pre-K, and then they come in and they're like 4 and 5 years old. And I'm like, man.
Yeah, this is already starting to form in them when they're that small.
Yeah,
that's tough.
Yeah, and then it's like two ways. You see them. They'll be someday. I mean, most days they'll be way off, but then some days you just see like the good come out. But that's what I'm saying. It's like the whole thing. It's like it's so slippery, and if I didn't have church, I don't know. It's really, really hard, I think, to be positive about stuff when you're kind of surrounded by all that. And, focus too much on it. Well, that was pretty dark.
Well, it's life is dark, and one of the things I appreciated about Peterson right away is, I think culturally we get this message that the default setting for life is happy and affluent and happy ever after. It's just not true.
No, it's not. Yeah, it takes a lot of work.
And what that does when you promote that endlessly is you isolate people who think, well, why do I have problems? Well, it's like, you have problems because you're normal.
Yeah. Right.
To have a problem is to be normal. To not have a problem is the exception.
Yeah, that's the odd times for sure.
So what's on your list? I saw you had a few things.
Yeah, I'm looking. I think. Okay. So I was thinking of another talk. I heard you and John. It's funny because you guys both y'all hit on some things and y'all talk to people, but y'all both interviewed some guys who were like new Christians, and y'all were talking about how you guys are giving some really good wisdom about not, because you have that, I think you said it was like a honeymoon period. Like you're like on fire, you feel this great energy, and then everything kind of it slows down. And I was like, man, they are you guys are so right. And just growing up, I mean, I saw so many people, and we go to retreats or something. Everybody's like, and now for me, when I got out of college and I kind of decided to live in a city away from my parents, I had to find my way and have different tricks to kind of keep the fire stoked, so to speak, I guess. And so what do you encourage your parishioners to do for things like that, or anybody who how do you, for 15 plus years, how do you keep excited about doing what you do and not just kind of turn away and saying I'm done with the whole thing?
I don't know if the key is to keep excited. I think, again, that's a cultural meme that we have. How long have you been married?
Though actually 6 years.
Okay.
Friday.
So you're just getting started.
Yeah.
But if you were to say, well, how do you keep excited about your marriage? I would say, I'm sometimes excited about my marriage. There are other times when I'm not. Yeah. And I don't think the main thing I have to keep is excited about it. I think the main thing I have to keep is faithful about it. And so there will be seasons of excitement. There will be tough seasons. And so I think that the key is to, if we live from our aspirations, we will most often stumble. But a key is to get into habits, or what are sometimes called spiritual disciplines. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've noticed in seeing the church over the last 20 years, especially in a place like California, is people get into the habit of well, I'll go to church when I feel like it, or I'll go to church when I'm excited to go. That's a bad strategy.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a tradition where, church attendance was a discipline. And in my tradition, it was twice on Sunday. And we, for a while in our tradition, we kind of began to say, well, that's legalistic. But the more I watch people, the more I think what's really critical is to develop good habits. Mm-hmm. And I notice in myself, in terms of my own spiritual life, that transitions in my schedule, transitions are hard. And so what's really helpful is to develop good habits and say, this is what I'm going to do now. This is what I'm going to do next. Now, temperaments are different. I'm a person who likes habits. So I like ritual and routine. Some people aren't that way, and they need much more variety. Well, then build that into your structure and look for things to do every day, whether you feel like doing them or not. That's the key, because it'd be like waking up in the morning and saying, oh, honey, I don't feel like being married to you today. So today I'm going to take a break from our marriage. And what do I want to do on our break from my marriage? Well, there was this person I'd like to check out down the street, and maybe I'll ask her out for a date. That is not going to wash in a marriage, if anybody doesn't understand that. So I think finding, then the second thing would be a good community around you, because there's going to be lots of up and down in the people's lives. But if you have a good community of people around you with good leadership, that's really helpful.
Yeah. Well, I'm super fortunate too, because the church we're going to now, is kind of that way. We have a pretty good leadership, and it's a bigger church, but we go to the Sunday school and the main service, so we kind of have started to develop a relationship with the Sunday school. So that's kind of like that, feels a need for that the smaller community, so you don't feel kind of just like lost in there. And then I've been trying to. I help run the lights and stuff, and so I thought that was like you're talking about the discipline. It's like if you kind of we all talk about embodiment, and like that was a big thing for me too. It was just like, man, like you can embody what you believe in different ways, and going and then you had the guy talking about going to Orthodox church and like just picking up a broom. Like, man, that's amazing, but it's so true. It's like you do that, and then you're embodying your beliefs and getting in alignment with all of it, and it's been helpful. And then if you're on schedule, like you're talking about making a church, it's like, oh, well, I got to make it this Sunday. Like even if you're kind of inconsistent other ways, you got to be there for that.
And just showing up, people don't appreciate what a big deal that is. I was talking to a woman who, she's got some health issues, and she's been every week attender, and she's been that her whole life because she grew up in the church. And she was kind of saying, well, I don't know if I'm going to be in all the time. And I really encouraged her to, no matter how you feel, just show up, because hopefully being around others will help. And also, like you said, having a job. One of the things I noticed early on with church work too, everybody needs a job. The whole church needs to be dependent on them for something. And once someone gets to the level of participation in the church where they have responsibility and where they have a job, well, now the church is theirs too, and they are going to contribute. And that's how you build a community.
Yeah, I'm always struck too by, like, even when you're talking about it, it's funny how the language matches up biblically with the imagery, because it's all about embodying, and they say like we're the hands and the feet and all that, and then what was the other thing? Oh, the way you're kind of describing it's like a marriage, and it's like we're supposed to be we're called the bride of Christ and all that. And so I think it's interesting, and I don't know, it's brilliant how that book has all that stuff in there, and then it's just like in our language, and it there's some of the really the best metaphors for describing all of it. I don't know. It's pretty astounding in my opinion.
Well, it's part of the reason the book people look at it and say, well, it's the Bible because everybody reads it. Well, maybe it's because everybody reads it. It hasn't gone away. And this is something that, if I hear some people say, well, it's this book out there. No, it's not arbitrary. And that's one of the points Peterson keeps making. This book has such enduring power and has been so astonishingly productive cross-culturally and trans-historically. When you look at something like that, you have to say there must be something to it. And of course, Peterson's whole message is that there's this fascinating connection between human societal health and the Bible. And of course, that's up for huge debate, but look at the evidence for it.
And on that note, like one thing I find very helpful too that you do is you place it in historical and cultural context. A lot of your sermons, like when you were talking about the Nebuchadnezzar, and I recognized it because I've been listening to a podcast about Roman history. And so they were always forever taking hostages. So the minute you started on that track, I was like, oh yeah, they're taking hostages for sure. Like that's what this is about. And then if they did good, they might have an exchange, or if they lost the Israelites in a war, then they might oh, okay, well, here's your hostages back. We're sorry, kind of thing. But
that's exactly right.
Yeah, and that stuff is that's one of the things that I was saying about my church is like when I grew up in it, they kind of read the Bible as the Bible. You don't need any of the other stuff. And like that, there's a huge, you can read the Bible that way. Yeah. And you can get stuff out of it. Yes. And I believe that you can learn and glean what you need to from the Bible and so on, but then you're missing out on the real, connection to all the brothers and sisters in Christ that have lived for just thousands of years. If the oral traditions, depending on how back the oral traditions go back. I mean, it's and is that just, do you find that stuff just because you're interested in history, or do you actually go out and try and figure that's how do you go about researching that stuff for those messages?
Well, again, a lot of it has to do with interest. So I'll read the Bible and you'll read something, you think, boy, that's weird. What's behind that? And so you start digging. And then as a pastor, I've always got to talk about these things. Mm-hmm. So when I begin the sermon process, I'll read the text, and I will have planned the text at some point, and then I'll sit there and think, well, what's behind that? And actually, on my channel, I have both Sunday school and then my sermon. And the Sunday school hour for me is a really important hour just for me, because I get to throw things out to just a group of people. And what comes back at me is really helpful because it helps me know what questions they have. And so when you get to Daniel, I grew up, as many people do, I learned those stories from Daniel. The first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel has some amazing stories in it, and we love it because God saves them.
Fire and all that, yeah.
But there is a cultural history and a cultural context around it. And so then I ask myself, what's really going on in this story? And on one hand, we think, oh, Daniel's up in Babylon, so what? Well, no, not so what. He was forcibly removed from his family and homeland by a foreign army and taken as a hostage and basically held. And then he's also subverted in that, if you can learn a lot about the Bible by watching mob movies, because this is something the mob would do, It's
it's probably where they got the ideas from. Old
That's right. This is how, and Augustine makes a similar quip about, about what the pirates said to a Roman emperor. He said, pirates and emperors, they're not that different, really. Emperors just have much bigger weapons. But the ways to manipulate people, to coerce people, to take power over people and get what you want out of them. And this is what governments have traded in forever. And I'm not an anarchist,
right?
But and in a sense, this is part of the reason, and I think we're blessed to live in the United States of America, because this is built into our story, and the founding fathers tried to find ways to keep government from getting too tyrannical. But this government tyrannies, and then as we go, if I didn't do Daniel too long ago in my adult Sunday school class, so I actually do have those videos online, I think most of them.
Okay.
But
I'll have to go back and watch.
what's amazing about the book of Daniel is the further I got into it, the more I understood the subtle interplay between, okay, you're a slave. You don't have any good options here. And then the question is, how can God use even this horrible circumstance to bring good out of it? And that's something that this kind of facile, surface level reading of the Bible just isn't going to bring forward.
Right.
Because Augustine, and hopefully as I go into Daniel in my sermon series, I want to touch upon Augustine, because Augustine wrestled with these issues. Because the question was, okay, if the empire is pagan and against God, what kind of citizen should I be? And now a surface answer was, well, I should revolt and grab the top spot and I'll be a Christian emperor. But what you begin to discover is that the structures themselves corrupt you.
Yeah.
And so from below, what you see is that Daniel is, on one hand, the best slave of the emperors, but on the other hand, he's slowly co-opting the emperors and improving and reforming them in a way that even the emperors might not be cognizant of. And this is the way that God actually wins us and decorrupts us, purifies us and sanctifies us from below. It's not overt and obvious, which so often in the church, people want to imagine black and white, right and wrong.
Yeah.
So often God is sneaky, and he helps us to do better than even our motives will allow.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, that's like the fake it till you make it thing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you hopefully the hope is that at some point you quit worrying about the reward and you just do it because it's the right thing to do, or you're trying to be more Christ-like or be more in alignment, and instead of just,
you do it out of gratitude. And you'll notice all of my sermons almost always end the same way: misery, deliverance, gratitude. And the reason I do that is because the Heidelberg Catechism, which is a doctrinal statement of my tradition, says, any good thing we do should be motivated by gratitude, not trying to earn our way, not trying to avoid punishment. And that it's in that way that it tries to address the motivational problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge distinction. I don't know that it's very self-evident. I mean, it wasn't to me until at some point I was like, well, why am I the way I am, and everybody else is different? And there's a whole slew of who a person is and what formed them that made up that. But I mean, the main thing was kind of like, it's like, oh, well, you didn't want to disappoint your parents, and you want to do the right thing because you knew that punishment was worse than not being punished. So you just did it, and then because it was habitual, well, that's why I'm who I am. I'm thankful for it, but at the same time, that's not like the earning part of it. You got to earn it, I think, and it's kind of hollow without it. Understanding that I don't know, it's vanity, right? I mean, you think I'm above that if I'm not.
Yeah. Hang on 1 second.
Sure.
Okay, I'll come back. No worries.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry about that. It's just me here, no secretary or anything to run interference for me. So I've got to answer my own door and my own phone. But no, that's exactly right. And so I just started actually, I listened to these great courses here. I just started a course on Nietzsche because I don't know enough about Nietzsche. And, one of the points that Nietzsche makes is a lot of the good that we do is because we don't want to lose status. and it's simple conformity. So on one hand, you can look at that and say, that's morally bankrupt. And in one view it is. But in the other hand, I want all my neighbors doing that.
Yeah.
I don't want them saying, I'm not going to do any good thing out of a bad motive. I'd love you to do it out of a good motive, but I'm more interested that you just do a good thing, okay?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, really, it's I'd rather somebody doing the right thing for the wrong reasons than not doing the right thing at all.
Exactly.
We want everybody to do the right thing for the right reasons, but I mean, I don't know how many people come to that point in their lives. I mean, and even like that's what I was saying earlier at the beginning. It's like it's so slippery. It's like I don't even know if I'm doing it for the right reasons. I mean, I hope I am, but if I really like sit there and think about it too much, I'm like, oh well, no, you're not really doing it for the right reasons. You're just a product of what you're doing. So I mean, I don't know. I'm just very fortunate. Just really, really fortunate in that aspect, I guess.
Well, and gratitude is, psychologists will tell you gratitude is something deeply connected with happiness. If you feel gratitude, you feel happy.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's a funny thing because if you say, well, I want to feel happy, so therefore I'm going to feel grateful. Well, it doesn't usually work that way. In order to feel grateful, you usually have to have a sense of having received a gift. It's connected with humility, and it's connected with actually a whole bunch of good virtues. And so this, this scheme of the Heidelberg Catechism that I use so often, misery, recognize that life is hard, and recognize that your motivations probably aren't that good. So you shouldn't feel self-righteous and superior to others. And then deliverance then focuses on what, in this case, what Christ has done for me. How, whether you think of that in terms of a spiritual sense, or if you think of that, well, Christ has blessed me through the gift of the church and gifts in the culture and gifts in my parents, and I've received all that. I haven't earned that. I haven't done anything for it. You didn't choose your parents.
No, I did.
Or your time, or the other gifts that were given you. It's just given to you. Okay, now how should I feel about that? I should feel grateful. And then that gratitude should well up into, I'm going to do good to others because people have done me well. And that's just a very practical strategy for not only doing good things, but feeling happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's fascinating too. That's like misery, isn't it? I mean, it's a church. It's like, why would you want to put misery in it? That's, I mean, like you're saying, like whether that's misery you recognize in somebody else or misery that you've gone through. And then that's interesting.
There's an old church adage: if you preach, if you figure your sermons to address suffering people, your church will never be empty, because the world is filled with suffering people. So talk to the suffering. Don't deny it. And because again, I think what we do in our culture is, to the sufferer, we say, well, what's your problem? Why do you have a problem? You shouldn't have a problem. And it's like, no, everybody's got problems.
Yeah.
And maybe some of them are petty, but often problems will find you. It's just a function of aging and life in this chaotic world.
Yeah, it doesn't help that like it's really, I don't know if it's any easier to hide than it was in the past. I mean, it seems like with social media and everything, it's hard. A lot of happy faces and beautiful pictures and edited stuff, and so I don't know. But it obviously happened in the past. I don't know to what degree it was easy or not. But I mean, people in like thousands of years ago were like, "Oh, that person's fake," like they're going through what I'm going through, kind of thing. So I mean,
we have about 5 more minutes. So
5 more minutes.
Anything on your agenda you just wanted to get to?
Not that I can think of. That's pretty much it, I think. But it was a pleasure to talk to you and meet with you. Like I said, my dad, he's like, you kind of miss out on a lot of good preaching when the church is in a transition. kind of like it was. And so, like I know it benefited him a lot. And so that was like, I have a lot of I'm really grateful for that because it was.
Oh, good. How old's your father?
Oh, geez. I'm a terrible son. He's in his 50 something.
Okay. Yeah, well, I know kids always got to sit there and do the math, whereas parents usually know exactly. Well, the parents were there for the, for the birth usually, so you don't forget that, but the kids weren't around, so. But,
I'm probably saying wrong, probably more like 60 now I think about it, because I'm 33, and I think they're like, my parents were in the 30s when I was born, so I'm a terrible son. There's my problems. Terrible son, working his age, but yeah, I'm a lot of the. He's my hero. He's like really one of the reasons why I am the way I am, and I watched him pray, and he made sure we were at church. Pretty much every Sunday. Stuff like that, so.
Well, he blessed you. That's a huge. I'm sure if what I'll do is I'll compile this and then I'll send it to you. And if you'd like me to post it, then I'll post it. And, but that's a huge, there are few things that will warm a parent's heart than hearing one of their children say, you were blessed by me. That's a huge gift to him. So, because that's what parents want for their children. They want their children to be blessed. They want their children to be happy, but to be fruitful and to do great things in the world. Nothing makes a parent prouder than the success of their children. So that's just life.
I'll think about it. I don't want to be I don't want to be that guy, but yeah, I'll think about it. It's just to me, and I don't think I said anything really on the top of my head.
Well, I'll send it to you and you can mull over it, and you can just email me back and say, yeah, I'd like to post it. Or even if you don't want to post it, that's totally cool. Right. About half of the conversations I do, I don't post because, either there's personal things or the person doesn't want it, or they said some things they didn't want, or they just didn't think it was worth it. So I'm totally flexible either way.
All right. Well, sounds good.
Well, let me say a prayer for you.
Okay, I appreciate
your family. Lord, I thank you for David, and I thank you for how you've blessed him. You've blessed him through his parents. You've blessed him through your church. You've given him gifts and skills. You've given him a marriage. You've given him a job. Lord, he feels richly blessed. And I pray, Lord, that you continue to work through him. I ask, Lord, that as you use him as an arts teacher to these young children, that they too would be blessed. And I pray that through his skill, he might develop their talents and open their minds. Lord, we know that the arts is an area that we don't always recognize or see its value, but those children are being formed and developed in ways that we can't necessarily see very easily. So bless him, Lord, and give him your peace. This I ask in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Take care.